Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our virtual meeting for the Bikeable Baltimore Region project. We're really excited to share the project with you and engage with some key questions that will help the project team move the project forward. We're going to try and have a very interactive session with you all today. And so if you could go take out your phone or use another screen and go to slido.com. To join, you can swipe that QR code. We're going to be using this with some questions throughout the meeting, so definitely want to get your feedback. If there's any technical difficulties, you can also paste your comment within the chat box. We've got somebody that's going to be reviewing the chat box to be ready to answer any questions, and if you don't want to deal with slido.com, you can also just put your comment there as well. So I think the first question we have is, where are you from? We would just like to engage with the audience and see where you're from within this really large Baltimore region. Cool, Madison Park and Baltimore City, and some great Baltimore City representation. Charleston. And do we know, Robert, I think this is it, 6 people, just I want to know to keep the tabs on how many responses.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Well, we're going to keep going. So the next slide just is a little bit of ground rules for the meeting, and then we'll do our project team introduction just so you can know who we are and where we're from, but how to participate. We wanted to make sure that everybody's really comfortable sharing feedback through Slido, through the chat, or because we're a small crowd, we can also have some good conversation. So a couple of things, we'd love for you to keep yourself muted throughout the meeting just as we go through the presentation. But please try and turn your video on if you're able to, or in a space where you can. We'd love to just engage with you directly and have some good feedback and idea sharing. And be prepared to give us your feedback. That's why you're here and you're taking time out of your busy schedule, and we very much appreciate that. Okay, so for introductions, I dived right in, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Baldwin. I'm with Alta Planning and Design, so I'm part of the project team. And our office is based right in Fells Point in Baltimore City. And then I live in Harford County, close to Bel Air. I have horses out in the county, and so that's the divide between city living and country living. But I'm really excited to kind of hear all of the different perspectives. And I'm going to turn it over to Charlene.
Great. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm Charlene Mingus. I'm the Active Transportation Planner at Baltimore Metropolitan Council, which is the Baltimore Region's MPO. We want to thank you for joining us today to discuss the Bikeable Baltimore Region project. So this initiative is a regional partnership between BMC, the Maryland Department of Transportation, City of Annapolis, Baltimore City, Anne Arundel, Baltimore, Carroll, Harford, Howard, and Queen Anne's counties. So we want to know what matters to you as we identify a regional bike network that's safe and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. The bike network will benefit everybody by connecting our local communities and providing safe and equitable access to places people need to go, like public transit, schools, work, and parks. So with that, we'll start with continuing introducing the project team. So I'll go next to Miriam.
Everybody, I'm Mariam from BMC. I have been working here for about 4 months now. Really excited to be on this project, traveling all over the jurisdictions, getting to know people, getting to know how they feel about biking. And I'm glad to be here today.
Regina.
Hi, folks. Regina Aris. I'm with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and we're really excited that our board, the elected officials in Central Maryland, have chosen to take on this task. And positive outcome will really depend on public input. So we're really appreciative of you being here tonight. Thank you.
And Robert?
Yeah, I'm Robert Conkey. I'm with Aceto Consulting, also on the project team. We're also based out of Baltimore. I live in the city as well. So super excited to be here.
And then who else is from your team here,
And I
Robert?
think the other person on my team is Jackie.
Yes, hi. Also on the project team, and I'm from PG County, Maryland.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we will dive right in. We've got a fun agenda tonight. The key pieces that we're going to go over is just give you an overview of the project. What is the project? What are our vision and goals? Then we're going to share some of our preliminary findings from doing some existing condition work. And part of that is engaging with you all during this listening phase of the project and some of the general public quotes that we've got through some stakeholder conversations. And then we're going to highlight some of the next steps. There's going to be many more opportunities to engage with the project team and also, review feedback as the project moves forward in the schedule. Okay, so our project purpose. Our vision statement is that the Bikeable Baltimore Region plan will work to create criteria and priorities to guide local jurisdictions' investments in bicycling infrastructure in the Baltimore region. So that's our purpose of the plan. And so what does that mean? It means that we want to make sure that all of the local jurisdictions, the average cyclist, the average person doesn't know where those jurisdiction lines end or start. So it's really important that somebody's taking that high bird's eye view of the network, and we're making sure there's no critical gaps, and that we're also thinking through prioritization of how we could potentially align together as a region to go after federal funding, state funding opportunities. So sometimes there's just a lot more power when you come together as a region. And so it just gives us an opportunity to think about biking a little bit differently than some of the local jurisdictions doing on their day-to-day basis. And so that's really our focus. The focus is not to develop new recommendations. It's more about collecting all of the great bike plans, recommendations, network proposed improvements, and then compiling that to elevate those segments that are most important to the region as a whole. And part of that process is the engagement to help us understand what is most important to the region. And I think for a region of this size, that's going to be really fun to navigate of what's important, in rural Harford County versus downtown Baltimore City. And so it's just kind of navigating the very different land use context to make sure that this plan works for everybody. And so, part of the why is, and I don't think if you're joining us tonight, then you're interested and passionate about biking or you want to learn more, but, why a regional bike network? And it's really, again, kind of breaking down those silos that can often happen with jurisdictional lines, just because government can kind of work that way. So we're making sure we're looking at a big picture, and that our primary focus is to giving more people opportunities to get around outside of driving alone in a car. So, biking can help each jurisdiction meet their adopted goals of increased job access and economic vitality, environmental, reducing air pollution and vehicle emissions, and then just overall livability of the region. And so we wanted to highlight for you here is that we are actually starting from a great base of existing infrastructure in the region. And so Robert's just going to pull up, and we can also try and put in the chat. We have a active data dashboard, a project story map that kind of walks you through all of the great data that exists. And the first map that we wanted to highlight is that existing infrastructure, so you can see across the region.
Can everyone see that?
Yep, perfect. And so when you look at this, you can just see that we have a lot of the dark blue lines are the shared use paths that exist within each county in the city of Baltimore. The lighter blue lines are side paths, or sometimes called multi-use paths. So that's separate from the vehicle travel lanes and normally back of curb. And then the green, which is mainly focused in Baltimore City, is the protected bike lanes. But there's also some in Howard County. You just can't see it with the density of this scale. And protected bike lanes are when the the bike lane within the roadway, so in the curb to curb section, is just separate from vehicle traffic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about user comfort and some of those priorities in design as we move through the presentation. The orange segments are the standard bike lane. They can vary in width. And then the pink lines are what we call shared road lanes. So they are promoted as bike routes, but they don't actually have a facility, but there could be signage and education to promote that a bicyclist has the right to take the travel lane and to expect cycling in the area. And so I think we wanted to flip back to our Slido questions, and we would love to just hear your thoughts based on your experience in the Baltimore region. What do you like about biking today? Just share a little bit of what's working really well for you if you bike on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. And you could also share any big opportunities that you see based on your experience biking in the region today. Robert, are you able to go back to the presentation for the QR code? Just if somebody needs to see that.
For the Slido?
Just for the Slido.
Yeah, that QR code in the top left is the QR code to join us on Slido.
I don't see a top left code.
We're still seeing the map.
Oh, you're still seeing the map.
Mhm.
Not what I'm seeing. Let me switch where we are. Sorry.
Okay.
That's
Everybody's just getting their biking experience
exactly.
and they're ready.
I'm seeing all kinds of good things coming in on the Slido.
Oh,
I
nice.
think they are now. Now everyone else can see what I was looking at.
Thanks, Robert. So cool. I like the few trails and lanes that are protected, so that separation from traffic. And the greenery. I do think that the city of Baltimore is really making a lot of effort, in the recent years in the past of just making sure that there's some of that shade for these hot summer days. And then sustainable infrastructure. Oh, that biking in the region is reducing stress. The bike parties that happen. Oh, this is dear to my heart, getting coffee shops and stores. I love going for a bike ride and stopping. I feel like I either stop at the coffee shop or at a brewery, depending on the mood. So that's great feedback. Leaving your car at home and get exercise, that physical activity and health is a big piece and a benefit of biking and having a bikeable region.
It's like a lot of bike party participants.
Having different transportation options. Getting access to nature. That's really important from both a walking and biking perspective. Awesome. So we started with the positive experiences. Now the next question is we would love to hear from you about what don't you like about biking in the region today? And that can be based on your experience, or if you've thought a little bit about the development of a regional plan. We would just like to hear any challenges or things that aren't working well for you to be able to go do all those things we just, talked about, and is the benefits and the opportunities. Inconsiderate drivers. Yes, everybody is in a rush these days and distracted. So that can be a challenge. Seems like all three of these immediate comments are more about like the culture of biking and that relationship between the cyclist and the driver. And that is definitely understandable. Incomplete bike lanes. I'm curious whoever put that, is that there's some just critical gaps in the network, or is that a little bit more specific about maybe the bike lane drops at an intersection? And y'all can feel free to unmute and just chat. We're a small enough crowd that we'd love to just dig in and make sure we understand this feedback. Yeah, the protected bike lanes are definitely coming. There's little pockets of them and some great improvements to build off of, but are limited for sure, depending on where you are across the region. Poor intersection design. Black butterfly is missed for traffic calming. I haven't heard that term in a while. Oh, what do you not like about biking? You don't like that the bike share has adjusted in Baltimore City specifically. I still see some of the bikes, but just not the stations. There's some funding and management issues on the vendor side. And that's happening actually across the country. A lot of cities are moving away from the station-based bike share, and they're moving. Scooters have really taken over, and then also just having the on-demand bike, being able to leave that wherever the destination or origin is. But I love that folks mentioned that. I don't think that we've heard that before. So having more bike share options is definitely something to keep in mind, and that micromobility connection. So maybe some folks in a region of this size are taking transit, and that having bike share or other micromobility options can really help you do that first last mile connection as part of a daily commute. Looks like somebody is still typing, so we're going to give space for that. Oh, I missed the comment about outreach to neighborhoods of color about bike lanes. It's a great point that in the region, you know, that the focused, making sure we're hearing from everybody, especially the harder to reach, you know, neighborhoods or populations, and being very deliberate about that equitable engagement approach. So that could, we could definitely look into ideas of how to improve that or make sure that this plan is outlining some case studies or best practices. Dockless scooters need dedicated parking spaces. Yes, for the ADA access, and sidewalk clutter can be an issue. And then the lack of bike cut-throughs. That can be frustrating if you're very close to reaching your destination or kind of getting through to another network facility, of just not having that small curb cut can be dangerous. Well, awesome. Really appreciate this feedback, and you've hit on lots of different topics, so that's going to help us, you know, really think through the network and recommendations. Okay, so we also wanted to highlight the goals that we have in place for the project, and we're going to keep these goals in mind through every phase of the project to make sure that we're staying true to what we're trying to do and the mission of this effort. And so the first goal is to advance equity. And so to do that by expanding and enhancing the regional bicycle network to improve safety and accessibility by providing comfortable bicycle facilities for all users. And so that can also apply to the engagement strategies when new facilities come online, like was just mentioned, but definitely want to frame the whole plan and the network and the development of a regional network around equity and accessibility. And then we also want to connect people to places. And so this is a really simple way if we really want to identify those activity centers and bicycle generators of where do people want to be able to bike to and where are they biking from. And if we kind of figure out those nodes and elevate the destinations that have more regional connections and priority, then that will help us to make sure that the network that we developed is connected and cohesive. Because, you know, I know that for myself, I'm not going to choose to bike somewhere unless I know I can get there in a low stress option from point A to point B. And, it's very intimidating for folks when they don't see that clear connected option. And then, like I mentioned in the introduction, the third goal is that we really want to frame throughout the project that we're considering context. This is a very large region that's diverse in both its context and its biking needs. And want to make sure that we're staying true to where each jurisdiction is along their biking program journey. And so we'll be thinking about that and making sure that the criteria that we use to prioritize the network and the recommendations we develop are context sensitive to the jurisdiction across the region. And then the additional goals that we have is, like I hope that you guys have been seeing, we've been trying to spread the word about some in-person meetings, and then this is the second virtual open house that we're doing, but we really want to emphasize collaboration. This is not something that's going to be built in a silo or by ourselves. We want to make sure that we're hearing from each jurisdiction, whether that is their technical staff, their elected officials, or the stakeholders that are organized within each county or Baltimore City, the city of Annapolis. And then also the state is a critical stakeholder of this. Some of the routes could be on state maintained routes. So really thinking through how we're collaborating and then understanding what cyclists want and need based on experiences. And so that's why that feedback that you just gave with some of those questions is really helpful, because we don't want to lose sight of that personal connection of what folks are enjoying about the network that exists today, and then some of the challenges that exist. The additional goal is to improve safety and accessibility. So we really want to prioritize looking at the crash data and then understanding user stress. And so that's just a term when you bike on a busy street with no separation, you're going to probably most likely experience high stress. And as a national best practice, we know that to encourage more bicycle trips, whether for commuting or recreation, we want to try and reduce that traffic stress. And so we're really prioritizing on what those roads look like that can offer a low stress option, or the design best practice of how to offer that low stress experience. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're looking forward to whatever network that we develop, that we're also putting in place a framework on how to maintain that network. Maintenance is a big issue across all transportation sectors. And so we certainly want to make sure we're going to be thinking through how to maintain the regional bicycle network beyond the plan and oversee the implementation and what those strategies and needs look like for each jurisdiction across the region. And then the third set of goals is we want to make sure that our plan has performance measures. So we want to set attainable ambitions. And this is really just making sure that our goals are measurable, that we are staying transparent to what those ambitions are, and that we're being realistic when it comes to the feasibility of the regional network and some of the existing funding constraints that exist across the region. We want the regional network and this plan to help support community development. And so that's just kind of looking at the benefits and acknowledging what some of you already said about the biking can help economic growth, it can help job opportunities, and then provide that physical health and recreational and tourism opportunities as well. And then finally, the environmental and health benefits. And so this is a little bit longer, but it's just really, it's always so powerful when I do a bike plan that really a bike network can help check the box on pretty much every goal that a city or a jurisdiction already has, especially when it comes to environmental and health benefits. So we're going to be tracking that and acknowledging that they're different in each county and for the cities, but working to make sure that we are keeping that in the framework of the development of recommendations. Cool. And so the next question in Slido is a little tricky because I like to compare, this is kind of choosing between your children of your favorite. It's hard to rank these, but we really want you to try and rank these goals by what speaks to you the most. Like if you could only do one thing, you think we should prioritize connecting people to places, or maintenance above all else, because maybe you've had some experiences with bike facilities that have a maintenance concern or issue for you. So just try and take a stab at rating these from 1 is the most important thing to you and 9 is the least important. Advancing equity was very quick at the top. I do like that connect people to places. I think it's a very simple topic, but can often be hard with the roadway network, but very important to have a connected network. Had a little bit of a switch up with the recent rankings in. This is always fun to see how it plays out and the different adjustments that folks make. Does anybody have any questions about the goals that I went over? Or concerns? Maybe there was something that you expected to see listed as a goal that you didn't see. We'd love to hear that information too. And if you don't want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to put that into the chat too. Yeah, Robert, could you maybe scroll down to just show the additional 2 and the ones that are ranked 8 and 9?
Fortunately, I cannot hear, but you should be able to see them all on your phone. You should be able to see all of them. But yeah, unfortunately, the screen's cut off. I can drop them all in the chat though if you want.
Yeah, I think everybody's had a chance to do the rankings. So I don't think we're waiting on anybody. So yeah, maybe if you want to just drop that in the chat, then we can have that for the record too. But it looks like connect people to places was number 1. Advance equity was always at the top 2. Improve safety and accessibility. And then support community development, support environmental and health benefits, emphasize collaboration, maintain the network, and emphasize collaboration were tied. And then I think the other 2 was context and no, I don't know what the other one was. Cool. So now, like I mentioned before, we want to kind of walk through the different types of facilities. And so part of this is education, and then we're going to ask you what facility type you most feel comfortable on. But we want to just make sure that for the life of this project, we're kind of all starting from the same base and we're talking the same language. And so, you know, some of the first facilities here is the shared use path, side path, multi-use path. It has lots of names, but the key piece is that this is a typically 10-foot wide trail. Sometimes they can be narrower, sometimes they can be a lot wider. That's completely separated from the traffic. It is back of curb, so not within the travel lane cross section at all. And as you can see with these images, often have a lot more greenery and can try and give that nature feeling, even though they often can be in a very urban environment. And then the next set is the protected bike lanes. And so lots of folks were saying that we don't have enough of them in the region. And so the protected element really just has that definition. These are within the curb section, so they are within the travel lane. A lot of cities across the country have been repurposing travel lane width. So maybe removing a vehicular travel lane in order to implement their separated and protected facilities. And you can see in that photo on the left that they have some sort of vertical separation. That vertical separation could be the plastic bollards, it could be landscaping, it could be completely curb separated, so it's almost like its own road, curb to curb section. There's lots of different strategies, but the key is that a protected bike lane has a vertical separation from the vehicular traffic. And then the photo on the right is the standard bike lane, which is the image, and we do have a good decent amount of bike lanes across the region. And you know, this here example is shown next to on-street parking, and so there is some design challenges of making sure there's enough width to, you know, to maintain that safety, but a great resource, you know, within lower volumes and lower speed corridors. And then the image on the left is an example of a quiet, low-speed road. And so a lot of different opportunities for roads that don't have a center line. So there's no line that goes through the middle. So it communicates that shared space. And really, these are often called bike boulevards, neighborhood ways, lots of different names, but the goal here is that these are on very low traffic, low speeds to help you navigate neighborhood connections and kind of link into a broader and bigger protected or separated bike lane network. And so the image on the right is all roads with any kind of speed or traffic level, including faster roads of 30+ miles with busier car traffic. And I know we have a lot of cyclists in the region that are very comfortable doing what those are doing in this photo, just taking the lane and interacting with cars in that way. But that is a smaller number of folks that are going to be comfortable doing this. And we can't wait to hear from you on what your comfort level would be with these options. Cool. So then we're back to Slido. We just have a question of, would love to rate how you feel comfortable biking across all of these different facility types. And this will help us as we start to think about the network recommendations that exist in each jurisdiction and what to elevate for regional significance based on this feedback and the feedbacks of folks across the region.
Please select everything that you're comfortable on.
There was a comment in the chat that we cannot continue to give blind trust to drivers and cars to obey the speed limits. We need speed bumps on roads with 30 miles per hour or more. Yeah, speed has a big impact on safety and on that traffic stress I was talking about earlier. So it's a great comment. So it looks like shared use paths, side paths, protected bike lanes, those quiet, low speeds, roads. And a few of you also selected the standard bike lanes.
And I think Omar in the chat said that they bike everything, but have always come into conflict with drivers on normal 30+ mile an hour roads and standard bike lanes. Seems like what the data is playing out here as well. That's where folks seem to be less comfortable.
It seems standard bike lanes are not very popular. Not protected, yeah.
Yeah, I think nationally what we find just as a firm that does bike planning across the country is, people just don't want that conflict. It's the conflicts where most of the crashes happen. And so it gets confusing and cyclists and sometimes drivers get insecure about who has the right of way. So when there's the ability to have that completely separate, so it's very clear defined space for each user, you tend to lower that traffic stress and increase safety for everybody. Okay, so speaking of the traffic safety, Robert's going to show you a map we've analyzed with help from our partners at Maryland Department of Transportation and other BMC staff. But there has been a traffic stress analysis. And so what that's doing is just an analytical approach to be able to help identify areas across the region that road characteristics that have higher stress versus roads that may be lower in stress for cyclists. And so this model takes into account different roadway characteristics, traffic volume, and speed. And so you can see, I know it's hard to see at this scale, but you can interact with all this data, zoom right into your particular neighborhood or the areas that you're interested in across the region. And the lower stress, the neighborhood scale streets, are in the darker green, and then we have the gray areas are where biking is prohibited on the interstates and limited access highways. And then so the orange roadways are those higher stress. So that's what you'll see, and I'm sure most of you will realize, those are the major arterials, the really high speed, high volumes, lots of different driveway conflict zones. And so that's really just a tool. It's not the tool. It's just one tool to help us assess traffic stress and current conditions. And so we'll be diving into this analysis a little bit more as we start thinking and comparing it to the recommended facilities within each county. And trying to evaluate what will be elevated into a regional network. But it's a great resource if you want to check out that data dashboard and zoom into your neighborhood, and you can also read a little bit more about the analysis and some of the stats.
Yeah, if someone could drop that link in the chat, folks, you can definitely look around and zoom in and see where you live and where you travel. Going back to the next.
Thanks, Arlene. So that link to the map, the data dashboard, is in the chat. And so on that, you'll find a lot more data analysis maps. So I don't know, Robert, if you want to stay on the maps and we just do a little spin through them.
Yep, I think that makes sense.
Cool.
So this is where we start with that.
Great. So there you'll see, you can kind of, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of review all these maps, but we've looked at a lot of different indicators to help us identify where the demand for biking is across the region. And one of those is looking at where the bike trips as a % of all trips are occurring. And so you can see the darker blue, which, for those of you, most of you are within Baltimore City or Baltimore County, you can see those clustered. And that makes sense because that's where most of the generators and the urban density and the population density are in the region. But you can see those darker tans in pockets outside and within each county. And so the key takeaway is that there are bike trips happening across the region. This is just calculating, how that compares to the percentage of all other trips that are happening. And it can be one indicator of demand. And then we also looked at opportunities, so short trip opportunities within this map. And this is just looking at where are those destination clusters. And so you see the takeaway is the darker blue here in the map is where there is a greater opportunity for capturing some of the short trips that are occurring by vehicle as a potential bike trip. And so we know it's not realistic that somebody from the top of the region, the very northern part, is going to bike all the way to Annapolis, but that may be happening for some of those long distance rides and opportunities. But we see a big potential in trying to convert those very short trip, single occupancy vehicle trips that people are doing now to bike trips if we have those separated facilities or better infrastructure in place to try and capture those opportunities. So that's another way to consider opportunities to invest in a network. And then many of you have mentioned, framing equity is one of our key goals. And we want to make sure that we're doing that very thoughtfully throughout the process. And so BMC has done a very thoughtful equity analysis to really map where the vulnerable population are across the region. And so you can see those darker blue areas are the high vulnerability to transportation needs. And so again, Baltimore City is reflected as the heart of the region, but you can see that there's need in every county. And so all sorts of need, and there's this analysis uses lots of different indicators of that need. So it can be age, race, income, but that information for more detail is available on the map. But this is just, again, another indicator of where infrastructure may be needed most, because those that are within a vulnerable population may not have access to a vehicle. And so having, low stress bicycle options and mobility choice could really make a big difference in their daily lives. And then safety. So we also wanted to make sure we understood the previous crash data, the historic bicycle crash data. And so you can see this heat map just clusters where those crashes have occurred across the region. And the darker red is just an indicator of the greater clustering of crashes across the region. You can see crashes tend to be, especially for cyclists, a little bit more sporadic, and especially in rural areas. And then the clustering really starts to happen in the more dense parts of the region, as simply an indication of that exposure risk. The more people you have bicycling, the greater risk they have on more crashes occurring. So again, just another good indicator for where improvements may be needed to address some historic safety concerns and issues. Cool. So that is a highlight of the data analysis that we've done to date. I'm happy to answer any questions, and it looks like there are some comments in the chat. We can make sure West Baltimore is in dire need of bike lanes, and the neighborhoods that need these safer facilities the most are resistant to bike lanes and cyclists in general because of the fears of gentrification. How can we help these neighborhoods? That's such a great comment. And I think that's something that we're tackling all over the country, and we want to be very thoughtful. So it's something that we're going to be looking into and trying to lean into case studies and national research on this. But it's a good point to what folks have already been telling us about the need for engagement and highlighting the benefits of biking and the policy changes. And so there's a little bit of education, engagement, but then being very proactive in policy to be thoughtful of the impact improving the bike network could have on more vulnerable populations and neighborhoods. So I think the next question we're going to go to in Slido is, what would make a regional bike network a success for you? Just an open-ended, this is a little bit more of like a visioning question. Just wanted to get your thoughts on when you think of a regional bike network, what would be a successful regional bike network? And then another comment, please be sure to engage with Black People Bike and other Black-led bike groups to help their outreach efforts. Love that. We have an advisory committee, and so we do have some representation there, but we can kind of go back to and make sure that we have their involvement in that focus of the project and moving forward. Appreciate that comment. So a successful regional bike network would mean that you could bike to work across town. Well, that's very simple and to the point. I love that. Success could mean that more protected lanes and shared use paths, side paths that connect to a variety of destinations. Safe, comfortable access to daily, weekly, and monthly needs. And then comprehensive enough framework to help folks avoid the cost of car ownership. Yeah, that's only going to continue to get higher in these economic times. And then, yeah, especially in a downtown Baltimore City focused, parking can also have an economic impact and may get more limited in the future as the city continues to grow. Oh, I love that somebody said being able to ride safely with my child. That's a theme that's been popping up a lot over the past several years of having an 8 to 80 bicycle network. And so that just means in theory that an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old should easily be able to navigate your bike network. And if we design for those two most vulnerable ages, then we should have a low stress and accessible network for everybody. Limited gaps in the network. Children will easily be able to be a next generation bike rider. I love that. That is looking ahead and visionary. It's a great goal. Give more independence to younger and older citizens that may not or are unable to drive. Specific neighborhood connections, being able to bike from Midtown, North Ave to stadiums and Middle Branch. And somewhere where a child could safely bike to school or friend's house without me worrying. Yes, I definitely hear that. And more greenways. I know that the city has got a great like spine going, and they're working hard to kind of make some of those key connections in Baltimore County as well as all of the counties at different scales. I think having a great greenways completely separated from traffic is a great ambition for the region and something we look forward to kind of figuring out how we could elevate that as a regional network and goal. Awesome, really good feedback. I really appreciate the thoughtful comments and personal comments as well. And then, so in that vein too, we wanted to ask if you could make one thing, if you could only do one thing, because we've heard a lot of different perspectives and different ideas, but if you could do just one thing, and it can be as specific as you want it to be, but we do ask that you kind of step out of your neighborhood focus, and if the region could do one thing that could benefit the entire region, what would it be? So if you were, mayor, president, state governor for the day, and you could do one thing to improve biking in Baltimore region, what would you do? We'd love to hear that and get some ideas and inspiration.
And this one is not on Slido, so perfect. Looks like Omar just raised their hand, so yeah. Please.
Go ahead, Omar.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I guess to answer this question, the one change, I don't know if this is two changes really, but it's to have protected bike lanes or side paths or whatever to all the major parks and schools within the region.
That's great. Safe routes to school or safe routes to parks. That's perfect. Anybody else have any thoughts or actions you would take?
And if you want to drop something in the chat, if you're not in a place where you can speak or you don't feel like speaking, feel free to put it in the chat as well.
Support for that safe routes to school or safe routes to park concept, which is great. And the culture, change the driver's perception about bikes and bike lanes. That's an interesting perspective too, Monica. It's just also the encouraging people to think about biking. I think some of us have gotten away from, we have biked a lot as a kid, and then as you grow up, you start to lose sight that could be a really valid, commute option or transportation option. So that encouragement component is important. Have the region become a bike-friendly destination. I love that idea in terms of, it's an opportunity perhaps to brand the region as a really great biking region. And, we've seen regions and cities across the country become tourism attractions simply because of their Greenway Trail network or their biking culture. So definitely something to aspire to.
And then I think Nick had another comment about stop considering unsafe bike facilities, sharrows, debris-filled shoulders, etc. as bike routes, because those aren't places that people feel comfortable biking and drastically overstates the size and completeness of a network.
Thanks for that comment, Nick. So that's a good perspective. More added. One thing is bike lanes are used heavily by seniors and motorized scooters. So having lanes that accommodate them is important as well. Yeah, that's a really interesting. Yeah, that's good to bring up. I think just from like a design perspective too is trying to think ahead. I think many of us didn't see the scooter phenomenon coming. And so what's the next, and making sure that our design is flexible and that we're thinking about all users and how potential conflicts even between different types of bicycles and options can be mitigated through design and policy. Awesome. Really appreciate those comments and feedback. Before we highlight what's next on the project, curious if anybody has any questions for the project team about the project, about the schedule, or just about anything. Go ahead, Omar.
I guess just one thing I wanted to clarify. So the project is it to provide recommendations on where to put new bike lanes, or is it to prioritize certain plans that are in place for the region?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. It is primarily to elevate existing local recommendations. So there are already a great network of recommended bike facilities across the region. So BMC has been working really hard to create a regional data set that takes all of those previous local recommendations. And then we want to be able to prioritize them, thinking about what's most important to a regional network. So what are the criteria? And so some of you mentioned safety, access to schools and parks. So identifying the pieces of the previously recommended networks to be able to stitch together a regional network. And so, I think that is a great distinction, that we're not really going to go get into the neighborhood details of you should bike from, on this road from here to there. We're going to rely on the local jurisdictions who just know that level of detail about their roadway systems and their networks best. And they've provided all of their data, and we're meeting with them routinely. And so that's going to be the focus of this effort, is to elevate a regional network of previously recommended projects.
Got it. So your recommendations would go towards the local DOTs or whoever is responsible for creating and maintaining the networks. And then would you also, I guess you're implying you would be responsible for following up to make sure that those get built, or is that more so on the agencies?
Yeah, I think it's a partnership, and Charlene or Regina, feel free to chime in, but it's really taking a regional network, and even the local networks takes partnerships. There's a lot of funding opportunities that the state and that the MPO has access to, and at the local level. And so it's never just one person's role. It's how can we create that cohesive approach? And for the regional network specifically, there can be a lot of opportunities of applying for federal money specifically if you go in as a region together. And so that's what we're really hoping this plan will help to identify the regional priorities, identify funding opportunities that may exist in the near future so that we can move implementation forward. But ultimately, it's going to be a partnership between the state, the MPO, and the local jurisdictions on the implementation, because it's important to remember that BMC, it does not implement projects. And so that is always the responsibility, is primarily between the local jurisdiction and or the state DOT.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Jennifer.
Well said, Jennifer. And one thing that will come out of this is performance measures. So it would be, this is how much bike lanes we have now. Here's the goal for in 5 years. And then potentially we would, at certain intervals, look and see how many were actually built to see that progress over time. So I think that's helpful, especially for the public to see and for us to also see.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one last question: when you provide those recommendations, will you also have or share like the methodology that you use to kind of determine those? Whether it's I'm speaking, from someone living in West Baltimore. Equity is a big issue. Obviously, there's issues with communication in this area as well. But I know we're severely lacking in bike lanes and that kind of general investment. So whether or not this area gets prioritized or not, I'd be interested to know how much those factors played into the decision.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's going to be very important to the project team that we're staying transparent about the decision making. And so we will be sharing, if you want to be a data geek, the data is going to be available. You can pour through it and kind of adjust. And then we are coming back to the community. So this isn't a one-stop, tell your feedback and then we go away. We want to come back, summarize what we heard from everybody during this listening phase, really take that into consideration as we start to think about those prioritization inputs and the criteria to how to identify a regional network. And then we'll come back to the community in forums such as this to kind of ask, did we get it right? Here's what the data is showing us. Here's some of the priorities, and here's the process we used. to identify a draft network, and we want to get your feedback on that.
Okay, and what's the cadence of those community meetings going to be again? And I guess this is the first meeting I've attended, so I'm not sure what's been held before. But you know, speaking once again to some of the issues you see in West Baltimore, I know having in-person meetings is really important just because a lot of folks don't attend online meetings here. You know, it's a generational issue, but you know, having those in-person meetings as a way to educate folks and put the right faces in the room, I think would do a lot to get people to understand why this is important.
Yeah, I love that. And I really appreciate you coming tonight to share that perspective. We did do several in-person meetings. There's one more tomorrow. So we're in what we're calling the listening phase right now. So it's the first series of meetings and touch points. So you haven't missed anything. It's the very early part of the project. And we really are just asking these feelings about what do you like about biking? What do you not like, to make sure that we're getting that good temperature check on what the public perception is and ideas and challenges. There'll be 2 more phases and opportunities for public engagement to kind of do those check-ins and stay transparent in the process. The schedule of the project, you know, extends into summer 2025. So we're taking our time to be really thoughtful. That said, you can see here the list of the in-person meetings that we had. It is a very large region. And so trying to find one location that's gonna best serve everybody, you know, was difficult. We're always open to ideas. So if you want to submit any of those ideas, you can go to publicinput.com/bikebalto-region. And there's some survey questions to take. Some of the survey questions we kind of got through with the questions tonight, but there's an opportunity to leave additional feedback. So, you know, we love your thoughts on how to best engage, especially the neighborhoods that often don't engage in the government conversations, or you think may be more vulnerable to transportation need in the region.
Of course, and thank you for answering all my questions. I appreciate it.
I love it. I appreciate questions. There's nothing worse than a public meeting with no questions, so I appreciate the time. Anybody else have anything? So those slides, we can go and just kind of highlight there's the bullet list of the meetings. There's the virtual meeting that we're hosting tonight. We're going to be in Queen Anne's County tomorrow night. And then here's all the direct links. And I think some of these have been already posted in the chat, but you can take our survey. There's the QR code that will get you for all this information. We have the publicinput.com/bikebalto-region website. Here's an email address if you just want to send an email with your contact information. We can also, we're more than happy to connect you to the local jurisdiction representative if you want to get more activated within your community. And there's a phone number, text, mailing address if you want to go that route. And then we're definitely tracking and would love to see some more social media conversations if you feel like that's the best way as well to engage a larger audience. And then we do have in the chat, we are trying to end the listening phase by July 26th. So keep that in mind, is that's a soft deadline. You know, we want to be able to compile what we heard and summarize it so we can move into the next phase, but you're always welcome to email and reach out to the project team. That doesn't have a deadline. Awesome. Well, that is all that we had for you tonight. We, again, really appreciate your time. I know that time is limited for everybody, so I've really appreciated your perspectives and stories and interest in the project. And we hope to see you at the next phase, and happy to answer any additional questions if you have, but also just want to say thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us so much. We truly appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
Y'all have a good night.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.